My name is Tessa Holloway, and the night my family gathered to save me from my failed career, my partner Camille walked into my parents' living room carrying a plain cardboard box. And every belief the Holloways held about what a successful life looks like came apart in the time it took me to lift the lid. They had arranged the room the way you arrange an intervention. My father, Gerald, stood in his spot by the fireplace, the spot he took whenever he wanted the height advantage. My mother, Meredith, sat with her hands folded on her knee like a woman at a funeral. My brother, Spencer, leaned against the piano no one in our family could actually play, and my aunt perched on the good chair, already dabbing at eyes that were not yet wet. There was a folder on the coffee table with my name on it. There is always a folder. Wealthy people believe a problem is not real until someone has put it in a folder. For 3 years, they had called it my situation, my phase, the soft, careful words that people with money use for a daughter who walked away from the plan. The plan had been medical school, then a surgical residency, then a marriage to someone with the right last name, then a life spent inside the kind of hospital where my father sits on the board and gets a wing named after the family. Instead, I had become a midwife. Instead, I caught babies in a converted craftsman house on the south side of Santa Fe, for families who mostly could not pay, and to the Holloways that was not a career. It was a breakdown with a business license. I need you to understand what was in that box before I tell you how it emptied the color out of my father's face. And to understand the box, you have to understand a thing an old woman taught me with her hands over mine at 2 in the morning, when I was 23 and shaking. Her name was Odessa, and she was the best midwife anyone in that city had ever seen. The first night she let me catch, I reached, the way you reach for something you are afraid of losing, and she stopped my wrists. You never pull a baby into the world, she said, low and certain. You catch what is already coming. You cannot force it, you cannot schedule it, you cannot make it arrive on your timeline because you are frightened. Your whole job, child, is to keep the room safe and steady, and to have your hands ready for what is already on its way. You do not pull, you catch what is already coming. I have built an entire life on those words, and by the end of that night in my parents' house, so, in a way, had they. But I am getting ahead of myself. If you have ever been the disappointment at your own family table, the one they lower their voices about, keep reading, because what came through that door was not what any of us expected, least of all me. 10 years earlier, I was exactly the daughter they wanted. I was pre-med at a school whose sticker they put on the back window of the car. I had the grades, the plan, the boyfriend with the jaw. And then, in my second year, a friend went into labor early and terrified in a town with no one to help her, and I sat with her through the night because I was the only person she trusted, and somewhere in those hours, something in me turned over and would not turn back. It was not the blood or the fear. It was the way she looked at me when it was over, like I had been a door she got to walk through instead of a wall she had to climb. I changed everything after that. I found Odessa. I apprenticed under her for years for almost no money, sweeping her clinic and learning her hands. And when her own hands finally failed her, she left me her practice and her name in this town, which was worth more than any inheritance the Holloways ever offered. I want to be honest about my part, because for a long time I told this story with myself as the pure one, and that is not true. I did not just leave the family plan. I hid. I built Cottonwood, my birth center, and I told my parents almost nothing about it, and I let them believe it was smaller and sadder than it was, because some furious, wounded part of me wanted to keep it safe from their opinions the way you keep a newborn out of a cold wind. But the truth underneath that truth is uglier. I also wanted to be underestimated. I wanted a day like the one that was coming. I spent years quietly keeping score, waiting to be proven right, and a person who is keeping score is not free, no matter how noble her work looks from the outside. I was doing beautiful things for the wrong reason. That was mine, and I own it. So when my mother sent the text, family meeting, 7:00, we need to talk about your situation, I did not feel dread. God help me, I felt ready, and being ready like that is its own kind of sickness. The meeting went exactly the way you would guess. My father did the talking because he always does. He said they were worried. He said I was 34 years old with no real income, no real title, no real future, playing house in a rundown building while my medical school classmates were running departments. He said Spencer had generously offered to help me get a position in hospital administration, something respectable, something with a badge. My aunt said a cousin of a friend had made partner somewhere, and that could have been me. My mother said the word wasted twice, once about my education and once about my potential. As though I were a glass of something expensive, she had watched me pour down the drain. Spencer, my brother, said the thing that I think he had been saving. He said, "Tess, nobody is proud of what you do. We love you, but nobody is proud. You catch babies for people who cannot even pay you. That is not a career. That is charity you cannot afford." And here is the part I am not proud of. I opened my mouth to destroy him. I had the numbers ready, the recognition, the proof, all of it loaded like a gun I had been cleaning for 3 years. I was about to pull. And then the doorbell rang, and it was Camille, and I remembered that you do not pull. You catch what is already coming. Camille is the coordinator at Cottonwood, my right hand, the person who holds the whole building together while I have my hands full. I had asked her, days before, to bring me something from the office, and I had told myself it was for a grant deadline, but I think even then I knew what I was really doing. My mother let her in with the stiff politeness she saves for the help, and Camille set the plain cardboard box on the coffee table, right on top of the folder with my name on it, and she looked at the room full of Holloways, and she did not shrink even slightly. Because she has seen women do the hardest thing a body can do, and a living room full of disappointed rich people did not frighten her at all. "I thought you might need these tonight," she said, and she left. Spencer laughed. "What is that?" he said. "Your business records. This should be good." I opened the box. It was letters, hundreds of them. Camille had been collecting them for years without my knowing, from the families who came through Cottonwood, and she had bound them into 3 thick books with plain cloth covers. Letters from mothers, letters from fathers. Letters written in 2 languages and in shaking hands and in the careful print of teenagers. Thank you for staying when the hospital would not take us. Thank you for catching my son when we had nowhere else. Thank you for holding my hand the night we lost the baby, and for holding it again, 2 years later, the night we did not. There were photographs tucked between the pages, hundreds of small faces, 10 years of them, a whole city of children who had arrived safely into a pair of hands my family called wasted. The room had gone very quiet. My mother had a photograph in her hand and did not seem to know how it had gotten there. But that was not the thing that broke my father. Underneath the letters, at the bottom of the box, there was one more envelope, and it was not from a mother. Camille had put it there on purpose, and when I saw the return address, I understood that my partner is smarter and kinder than I deserve. It was from Dr. Aiden Reyes, the chief of obstetrics at the very hospital where my father sits on the board. The hospital with the family name on the wing. My father's whole idea of what real medicine looks like. I read it out loud, because my hands would not let me do anything else. It was an invitation and a thank you at once. For years, it said, the hospital had been quietly sending its most frightened, most complicated, most vulnerable expectant mothers to Cottonwood. The ones the system was failing, because our outcomes were better than theirs, and everyone in that building knew it. It said the state was funding an effort to build centers like mine across the region, and that they wanted me to lead it, to teach it, to train the next generation the way Odessa had trained me. It said, and I will remember this line until I die, that I was the most important thing to happen to how this city cares for mothers in 30 years. My father knew that name. Aiden Reyes had shaken his hand at galas. My father had spent his whole life trying to be respected by exactly that man, and it turned out that man had been quietly revering the daughter Gerald Holloway was ashamed of. The color went out of his face slowly, from the top down, like water leaving a glass. "You never told us," my mother said, and her voice had lost all its shape. And this is where the old me, the one who had been keeping score, wanted her moment. This is the part in the story where the wronged daughter stands up and lists her triumphs and watches them squirm and drives away in a beautiful car while they sit in the wreckage. I have watched 100 stories end that way. I understand why. There is a hunger in being underestimated that wants to be fed cruelty. But I was standing in a room full of photographs of babies I had caught, and I could not do it. Not because they did not deserve to feel it, because I did not want to become someone who needed them to. You are right, I said to my mother, and I set the letter down. I never told you. I let you think it was small because I did not trust you with it, and because, if I am honest, I wanted a night exactly like this one, where I got to be right in front of all of you. That part is on me. I have spent 10 years doing the best work of my life partly to win an argument with people who were not even in the room. That is not something to be proud of either. Spencer would not look at me. Spencer, whose own life I happen to know was not the polished thing the family pretended, whose marriage was quiet in the bad way, and whose job existed mostly because of the last name. Spencer, the golden child, who had said nobody is proud of you, and who now had a photograph of a 2-day-old baby face down in his lap where it had fallen. I did not humiliate him. I want that on the record because the easy version of me would have. What I did was harder. I said, Spence, you were wrong about my work, and I think you already know that. But you were not entirely wrong about me. I made myself unreachable. I made it easy to misunderstand me, and then I resented you for taking the easy road I paved. So let us both put something down tonight. My father finally spoke, and his voice was not the fireplace voice. It was smaller and much older. All these years, he said, the nights you were not at family things, we thought you were avoiding us out of, I do not know, spite. You were catching babies. Most nights, yes, I said. Someone has to be there when it will not wait until morning. It never waits until morning. He looked at the letter from the chief of his own hospital, and I watched a lifetime of a certain idea die in his eyes. The idea that success is a title you can hang on a wall, and that anything without a title is a hobby. What do you want? He asked, the way people ask when they have nothing left to bargain with. And I recognized it because it is the same question the source of all this cruelty always asks. What do you want? Revenge. A pound of flesh. Nothing, I said, and I meant it. That is the whole point, Dad. I do not need anything from you, and I have not for a very long time, and I think that is what actually frightened you, more than the failed career you invented. You could not find the handle on me anymore. There was nothing to fix, and nothing to fund, and nothing to steer. So you called it failure, because a daughter you cannot steer is easier to pity than to admire. My mother was crying now, quietly, into a photograph of somebody else's child. I did not leave them with a slammed door. I want to tell you I swept out in triumph, but that is the story I am trying not to be in anymore. Instead, I did something that took more from me than any speech would have. I picked up one of the books of letters and I put it in my mother's hands, the real ones, and I said, keep this one. Read them. Not the letter from the hospital. The ones from the mothers. That is what I actually do. That is what you have been ashamed of. And then I opened the door back into my own life, but I left it open behind me, which is a different thing than walking out. That was a year ago. People always want to know how it ended, as if families end. They do not. They just turn slowly like a long labor, and the hardest part comes right before they do. My mother reads the letters. She has read them all more than once now. She started volunteering at Cottonwood on Tuesdays, folding tiny blankets and making tea for terrified fathers in the waiting room, and she is good at it, and she has never once told me I am wasting anything since. My father took longer, because pride takes longer, but he came to the center in the spring, alone, and he stood in the doorway of a room where a mother was in the deep of it, and he watched me do the work he had called a phase. And afterward he sat in his car in my parking lot for an hour before he could drive home. He told me that later, himself. That is the closest thing to an apology a man like my father knows how to make, and I decided to let it count, because I am done keeping score. Spencer is the one who surprised me. His polished life did come apart, more or less the way I quietly knew it would, and when it did he did not ask me for money, and he did not ask me for a title. He asked if there was anything at the center he could actually do. So now, some evenings, my brother drives our mothers home from late appointments and carries car seats to the curb and installs them correctly, which is a genuinely hard skill that saves genuinely small lives. And he is proud of it in a way I never once saw him be proud of anything the family handed him. He is earning something back, slowly, with his hands. I have not handed him a key to the deepest part of me, because forgiveness that hands the key straight back to the person who took it is not forgiveness. It is just a slower version of the same wound. But the door is open, and he keeps walking through it the right way, and that is how you rebuild a thing that broke. Plank by plank, night by night. I kept one of the letters for myself, framed on the wall of my office next to a photograph of Odessa with her sleeves rolled up. It is from that first friend, from all those years ago, the one whose labor turned my whole life over. She wrote it recently, when she heard about the meeting. She wrote, "You were never the wall. You were always the door." Because here is the thing my family spent 34 years getting wrong, and the thing Odessa got right with her hands over mine in the dark. You cannot pull a person into the life you have planned for them. You cannot force a daughter to arrive as the surgeon you imagined, on the timeline you set, in the shape that would look best on your wall. You can only keep the room safe enough, and steady enough, and warm enough that she can finally arrive as who she already was. My family spent all those years pulling, and the night they finally stopped, they got to catch what had been coming the whole time. So if you are the disappointment at your own table tonight, the one they lower their voices about, I want you to put your hands where you can see them, and I want you to ask yourself one honest question, because I promise you it is the one that will set you free. Are you still doing the best work of your life, just to win an argument with people who are not even in the room? Tell me down below what you have already built that they were too busy being ashamed to see, because I would bet everything I own that it was never wasted, and that it was never small, and that it has been quietly arriving in the world this whole time. Waiting only for someone with the sense to open their hands and catch it.